recording. There we go. And I am going to, if anybody has any concerns about the chat or anything else, please post that in chat and we will get started. Let me share my screen here. Okay, everybody see my screen okay? Yes, very good. So today's presentation is about safe harbor. I call it protection beyond compliance because some of our previous events we've dealt with for cybersecurity for compliant organizations like insurance companies. And the idea of safe harbor and file encryption goes beyond compliance, meaning that you can be compliant, but this will give you additional levels of protection and protect you financially in the event that data is exfiltrated. So a couple of background things about cybersecurity in general that I always go over to get started. Most firms have exposure. There's important security tools and protections that are missing for most people as the environments are changing. Many firms don't have a disaster recovery plan. And everybody needs to make sure that their PII and PHI, personal identifiable information and personal health information, is properly secured. Finally, everybody needs cybersecurity insurance. We can help you with all of these things. Cybersecurity today, the events in the past 2 years have drastically changed our environment. It used to be that a lot of small businesses didn't really focus on this. Even the managed service providers would do more basic protection. And now the environment has changed. People have seen this with major attacks at the hospitals and other small businesses are now the primary target. I also like to point out that in today's environment, not all IT providers or IT people are equal. There's a lot of good people in our local area here. The problem is that some may actually put you at greater risk than if you're doing it yourself. And we'll talk about that more at the end of the event. That in mind, a little bit about Rose Computers. We were founded in '97, 24 years ago. We've got 11 employees. We have over 1,000 network engineers watching over our environment and available for expert assistance. We're Sophos Gold Partner, Microsoft Silver, and we achieved the CompTIA Security Trustmark Plus. Over on the left, you just see what we do, design, implement, and manage. And our guiding principles are our culture, community, learning, and responsibility. The CompTIA Security Trustmark Plus is really an important step for us. And as you can see here, it signifies that we adhere to the industry's highest standards for security practices and business processes and critical components of identification, protection, detection, response, and recovery is related to data security. Earning the Trustmark Plus demonstrates a true commitment to address the challenges of security compliance facing our industry. I'm proud that we are the first and currently the only Vermont firm that has chosen to pursue and achieve this certification. It's really the only industry standard certification for security providers. So a little bit about the people here at Rose Computers. I founded the firm, 34 years of experience. And I've done, we like to give back to the community. I've been doing the Spectrum sleeping out in the cold for over 7 years. Nabil is our CTO. He's with us as a panelist today. He was trained in network security with the U.S. Army, and he was the primary engineer of the State of Vermont Department of Public Safety. Shannon is an account executive with us with an insurance background. He worked with the Fortune 100 insurance carriers and as well as having his own insurance firm. Glad to have him on the team. He's an excellent fit, understanding risk, which is really what cybersecurity is all about, risk management. So today's topic is safe harbor. So defined by Webster's dictionary as a statutory regulatory provision that provides protection from penalty or liability. This is really important for HIPAA clients. The HHS is the Department of Health and Human Services. It's responsible for all the HIPAA laws and regulations. Their journal describes the fact that encryption can be used for safe harbor. electronic personal health information that has been encrypted as specified within the HIPAA security rule qualifies for the standard of safe harbor. What does this mean? It means that in the event that you had a breach, whether you're a HIPAA client or not, then you will, if you're a HIPAA client, you will not be faced with as severe financial penalties. So safe harbor, how do you limit your risk beyond meeting compliance requirements? Before I introduce Dimitri, our guest speaker from Atacama, I want to make it just kind of a little bit about this event. It talks about how to recover from a cybersecurity incident. The most of this content today is one specific focus on a product that we're offering with our partner Atacama for safe harbor. Recovering from an event is really all about your incident response policy and your cybersecurity insurance and what tools you have in place. We can address that at the end in question and answers, but most of the event you're going to see today is going to be about this fantastic, very unique tool that we're offering with Atacama to provide file level encryption that does not rely on your general authentication to your system. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, do a quick check to see if there's any questions before we get rolling. Thank you for hosting this webinar. Very good. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce Dimitri Nemirovsky. He's our partner at Atacama. I did not prepare like a background information about you, Dimitri. When we work together, we're working with the product, but I'm going to turn it over to you to present your product to us. Really appreciate your being here today.
Terrific. Thank you. Pleasure being here. And thank you everyone for joining us. Just a little bit about myself. I spent about 15 years of my professional career as an attorney, primarily doing regulatory law. So quite familiar with regulatory safe harbors. And, let me take it a step back and actually note a pet peeve of mine as it relates to cybersecurity. When cybersecurity professionals look at regulations and basically check the box, adherence to those regulations. And that's something that I think from a security posture really introduces a level of risk that may not be perceptible beyond, just superficially complying with a particular rule of regulation or your internal policies and procedures. And I see, companies doing that repeatedly. And what's counterintuitive is I actually see large entities doing it that are incredibly regulated across multiple jurisdictions. And they do so because of the inordinate number of regulations that they need to comply with. So in a way, these regulations that we see affecting so many companies and so many industries, because they are so voluminous and they are so draconian and onerous to comply with, usually what happens is, the security practitioner is literally checking the box and complying with those regulations. And that's an unfortunate state to be in. And I think, David, you're highlighting what we're seeing in the market over these past 2 years, I think is changing that posture, changing that mindset in a very positive way. From my standpoint, what I see is a sea change to complying not just with those regulations and not being content with just the check the box solutions out there, but really getting deep into it and understanding why a particular solution is being deployed within the organization. Security in depth is a term a lot of people throw around, but there's meaning behind that. And if you can really fundamentally understand the importance of, why it is that you're doing a certain thing, I think, overall, the organization is going to benefit for it because you're not just, going through the paces, you're meaningfully introducing something in the environment that is going to add value, that is actually going to deliver on the security guarantee. And I'm hoping that whatever product you're using has some security guarantee behind it. And I don't mean that in the insurance, definition or terminology. I mean that strictly from the security that the particular tool is purporting to bring to the table. So, where I really like to start when I talk about cybersecurity is really delving beyond that cybersecurity umbrella. And I think a lot of people, when they think about cybersecurity, unfortunately, also fail to focus on information security. There's a difference. The difference being that information security is a component of cybersecurity. So if you think of a cybersecurity construct, what is it really designed to do? At its core, cybersecurity is there. It's the systems that you put in place, the policies that you have to prevent an unauthorized third party from gaining access to your systems, from being able to penetrate your network. So to analogize, cybersecurity is that wall, right? It's that thick wall with the moat, with the tall fence to prevent that adversary from getting in. Information security is a little different. Information security is singularly focused on preventing an unauthorized third party from gaining access to the data that you're protecting. And a good cybersecurity program will, by definition, include a component that focuses exclusively on information security. And again, a lot of security practitioners fail to make that distinction, or fail to devote the proper attention to that information security stack. And why that's important is because, as probably everyone on this webinar knows full well, unfortunately, the weakest link, and I don't care how buttoned up your programs may be, how awesome and resilient your policies and procedures and systems may be, we all know that the weakest link around cybersecurity is the human element, right? They are the real concern that is going to rear its ugly head again and again and again, and that's because individuals are fallible, right? Systems may be less fallible, but individuals more so. And you tell them not to click on those errant links, not to open up emails that look funny, but we all know that's never going to work 100% of the time, right? So when that human element fails, and it will fail, right? So it's a question of when, not if. That's what really hinders a cybersecurity program. And in particular, with a lot of the social engineering attacks that we see out there, right? Those social engineering attacks are laser focused on compromising a user's credentials. There's a reason for that. Not only does it allow the adversary to gain, quote, easy access into the network, into the systems, but it also creates a situation where, by virtue of the fact that that adversary has compromised someone's credentials and has been able to penetrate the system, in effect, what's happening now is all of your systems, your entire cybersecurity tech stack is pretty much working against you, because those systems are recognizing this adversary as an quote unquote authorized party. And because they are viewed as an authorized party, they basically have wholesale access to everything. Why that's important, especially when we talk about encryption. Well, if you think about a lot of the encryption solutions that are available in the marketplace, most of those solutions, in order to get around the UX UI of encryption, right, to allow everyday normal non-technical users to not be befuddled, to not be intimidated by encryption. Well, encryption has been connected to identity and access management controls. And by connecting encryption to centralized federated roots of trust-based identity systems, what we've done, right, is really weakened the security element, the encryption, the strength of encryption and what it really can offer to any organization that's using it, right? So, by connecting encryption to identity and access management, the UX UI has been completely solved, right? It's near transparent, right? It's instantaneous, it's great. But by doing so, we've really, diminished the security elements that encryption can deliver. So, with that, a little bit about Atacama and what makes us different and the value proposition and the security guarantees that we offer. So when we started building Atacama about 4 years ago, you know, we by design began building Atacama by untethering it, by not relying on identity and access management systems. And the inspiration really for Atacama was, believe it or not, or believe it, it's not that, you know, uncommon these days, the Bitcoin blockchain. Why the Bitcoin blockchain? Well, if you think about the Bitcoin blockchain, right, it's this public, and I use the word ledger loosely, but it's this public ledger where, you know, anyone in the world pretty much can view it, right, and can see certain information on this this blockchain. And at its core, what's happening is, you know, the public-private key pairing, right, which underpins the Bitcoin blockchain, really is securing, based on today's value, you know, like $1 trillion. And that's incredible, right? Because it's this open thing and it's there for anyone to attack, right? People can try to attack it, people can try to penetrate it. And if they do, right, the windfall would be tremendous, right? So we kind of said to ourselves, we sat down and said, well, that public-private key pairing, can we do that to passwords, right? And why did we want to do that to passwords? Well, if you think about an organization and the tera or petabytes of data that they have within the organization, imagine, if you will, right, fantasy land, right? Not California, just real fantasy land. Imagine, if you will, an organization where every employee within that organization, you know, the thousands of employees within the organization have perfect memories. They can memorize everything instantly. And now imagine that we take every single file within that organization and we password protect that file, right? We encrypt it basically by password protecting it using a unique password for each of those files. And that unique password is shared among all the employees. So all 1,000 employees within this, you know, magical organization can remember every single password, every unique password for every single file, right? And each of them know what that password is. Well, you know, that would be interesting from a security standpoint, because if someone's credentials were compromised, if an adversary was somehow able to breach the network, the system, and they tried to gain access to those files or exfiltrate those files, well, they're all password protected. And therefore, the adversary would be unable to exfiltrate the information. And all the users would be able to access the files because they magically know all the unique passwords to those files. So that's fantasy land. How can we make that a reality? And that's really what we've done with Atacama, right? The aha moment to us came from that inspiration around the Bitcoin blockchain. And we said to ourselves, well, what if we can encrypt a file with its own unique encryption key, and then take that key and cut it up into pieces, distribute it, and do so in such a way where the user doesn't need to know what's happening behind the scenes. Becomes really easy for the user to be able to access those files, right? And at the same time, not have anything sent, not have a central key store, not have a master key or master password, if you will, and really have a distributed system that is not reliant on traditional identity and access management controls like Active Directory. And that's exactly what we've designed with Atacama. Atacama runs on distributed key management. That's really the secret sauce behind our software, right? That's the engine that runs it. And with our software, what happens is each file is encrypted with its own unique encryption key, and we utilize AES with a 256-bit key. The software then takes that encryption key and it cuts it up into component pieces, key shards. And the software intelligently distributes those key shards to every single user who has access to that location where the file is stored, and is also provisioned with Atacama. And Atacama runs, the normal deployment is Atacama running on an endpoint, right? User's workstation, and their mobile device, right? They have the Atacama mobile app. And what happens is the key shard for that particular user distributed to their devices is unique to that user. And that's because we use the user's public key to in turn encrypt the key shard that is being distributed to that particular user. So there's no interoperability of key shards. So now you've created a unique password for every single user. And when that user wants to open a file, instead of needing to remember a password, they get a push notification on the Atacama mobile app running on their phone. And to the user, it looks and feels very much like a 2FA or SSO solution, where they tap approve and they're sending back a piece of the key shard to their machine, where the key is reconstituted and the file is decrypted. So our design really, by allowing an organization to encrypt their files, right? And by not relying on traditional identity and access management, what we've done is we've really solved for the issue around encryption. You can now encrypt files without really interrupting user workflows beyond the necessity to have to tap approve. And by the way, we've introduced some performance hacks there to allow the user to launch a session based on policy, and the session allows them to open up, let's say 100 files over 8 hours. Pick a number; those quantities can be customized. And so by doing so, files remain encrypted until the user needs to interact with them. And if an adversary were somehow able to compromise the environment and wanted to open a file, they'd be unable to do so. If the adversary started wholesale exfiltrating the files, they'd be able to extricate the files, and I want to be clear about that. But what they would exfiltrate are the encrypted ciphertext version of the file, which again, because we're utilizing AES 256, that information is rendered completely useless to the adversary. And speaking of safe harbors, with respect to what is reportable and what is not reportable, and this is really important, right? So for example, in New York, we have the Department of Financial Services, a very onerous regulator with a very onerous cybersecurity regulation and requirements. However, you would not need to report that breach, that particular breach, or the file exfiltration, if you can demonstrate to the regulator that even though something was stolen from the organization, because the key, the decryption key, was not stolen with it, which you can show without a comma because the key is always, split. In that context, you don't even need to report to that regulator. And I view that as so incredibly important in today's day and age, where unfortunately, organizations that get hacked, instead of being the victim, which they are under those circumstances, the regulators don't treat those companies as victims. Instead, the regulators, because they can't go after the hackers most of the time, what they do is they look to the company, and now the company is on its heels. It's defensive, right? It's no longer the victim. It is now looked at as somehow being, negligent or complicit because it did not have the proper systems in place. And, having to, notify everyone, have those letters that you have to send out, have those letters resident with the particular, regulator for anyone to see. And now, right now you're in the sights of the regulator, right? So you have to do, beyond the reporting requirements now, next time you're being examined, they're going to rake you over the coals. So nobody wants to be in that situation. And if you can avoid it, so much the better. And that's really, I view as a, it's sort of like when I started talking about one of my pet peeves being check the box compliance. Well, with our solution, what's really, important to understand is not only are you checking the box as being compliant with the regulator, but you are actually deploying security that is meaningful and will deliver on the security guarantee, right? So our biggest security guarantee is this, is that an unauthorized third party will be unable to access anything encrypted without a comma unless they're able to compromise 2 devices belonging to the same user, right? Not impossible, but that's really not the attack that we see perpetrated mostly these days. And part and parcel of that security guarantee is that if you are hit with some kind of attack where data was exfiltrated and now you're being extorted for a ransom, again, the security guarantee is that whatever has been exfiltrated is the encrypted ciphertext version of the file, which again, because we're utilizing AES with 256-bit keys, it's rendered completely useless to the adversary. So I don't know, David, does it make sense to show a really quick demo, or should we just open this up to, to questions?
Yeah,
at this time?
I think it probably would make sense. We've got plenty of time. And I recognize, I knew that going into this, that this product is a little bit more complex, right? Just by its very nature. So some of the participants, it may be a little bit intense, but that's what this event is for. The service offering that Atacama offers is so unique for, everybody that's listening. This is why we partnered with Atacama. We find a solution that not only are you compliant, but like Dimitri says, it really protects you, because too many organizations can be compliant, but they still have tremendous risk, right? Financial risk if the data, is exfiltrated, being the big thing. Data loss prevention can only go so far. And this is only two solutions that we've found that does not rely on user authentication. Everything else out there, all the Microsoft stuff, relying on Windows authentication, once you're on the system, they've got access, they've got the keys to the castle. So this way, if you implement this solution, it's a different level of protection, because even if you're breached, your data is secure. So I don't know how many of the people that are attending. I guess we could put that, post in question and answer, or post in chat. But yeah, let's go ahead and do a demonstration explaining, the basic process, Dimitri, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me get this out of the way here. All right. So what you see in front of you is, this. I'm running a Mac, but this would be the equivalent of Windows Explorer, and I'm actually mirroring my phone on the left. This is not an emulator. The reason I'm showing the phone is because it's so important to the user experience, because at the end of the day, the user doesn't know what's happening behind the scenes. From their standpoint, really what they walk away is the understanding that they're using their phone to unlock files. And you see that little light bulb go off when the user uses it for the first time. And it's empowering in a way, because they understand that, hey, this thing is locked until I unlock it. So it does give that user the sense of, power there. So, and I should add, we go where the files are, right? So the files can literally be stored locally. They can be on a network share. They can be with any of the major cloud providers. We are pretty much platform agnostic. We go where the files are. And the way you deploy Atacama, you really have options baked in, right? So you don't need to deploy Atacama across the entirety of your file folder directory. You can be, laser focused on human resources if you need to be, based on a particular use case that you're hoping to solve for. You can basically create a special location for encrypted files. We refer to that as the Atacama Vault. Or if you're using a data discovery and classification tool, and I really view that as an incredibly compelling use case. If you're using one of these data discovery and classification tools, right, which is out there scanning your environment, looking for sensitive information, and then when it finds something with sensitive information, it adds a label to the file, right? Atacama can read those labels. And as soon as that label is appended, we read it and we instantly encrypt the file wherever it may be, right? So that, to me, that narrative is a really compelling use case, because you have the one solution out there scanning, looking for the risk or at-risk data, and then you have the other solution instantly pursuant to policy and without any user subjectivity, protecting the information by locking it up. And that's a really neat use case. So what does it look like from an end user standpoint, right? And by the way, this is a demo location, so these are all dummy files, so none of the information is real. But you'll see here a bunch of HR resumes, and there's a lock icon. And the lock icon is really there just to, it's a visual cue to the user to know that the file is locked, right? So if this was, an environment where I was using it in combination with that data discovery and classification tool, not all of these files would be encrypted. You'd see, maybe a couple based on sensitive information that may be contained within those files, and only those couple of files would have the lock icon on it. So when I go to open a file, I double click on it as I normally would. It doesn't all open up. Instead, I get that push notification to the Atacama app running on my mobile phone, and it's asking me to approve the opening of that specific file. As you can see here, the file name is right there. And you'll see here also authenticated name, and that's important, and I'll explain what that means in a second, because I am being asked to decrypt that specific file. And that's really important, right? So when I tap approve, it opened up on my other screen here, but it was really instantaneous. Let me show you that again, just so you see it on this screen. I'm gonna tap approve. The file's gonna open up. There you go. I can now do anything I need to do with this file, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see that that lock icon turns to an orange unlock. The file will remain unlocked for a period of time, customizable by the admin. My default is 1 minute. So as I talk, you'll see those files will relock themselves up. And when I say relock, they'll be re-encrypted. But I mentioned earlier that I was opening up that specific file. And that's important. Why? Because without a comma, every action vis-a-vis these files, right? If I wanted to move this file out of this location, if I wanted to rename this file, right? If I wanted to copy the file, all of that would trigger that push notification to me as the user to my phone. Why is that important? Well, let's assume I had a file in here that was literally named passwords, right? What I don't want happening is for an adversary to be able to get into this location and replace that password name with Amy Cruz, right? Switch the file names without me knowing. That would be a problem. Why? Because if I went to open up what I thought was Amy Cruz, but is really now that passwords file, and blindly tapped approve, well, I'd be exposing that really sensitive piece of information to that adversary, and I don't want to do that. So without a comma, at every step of the way, we are, really focused on understanding what the particular security risk is, and we try to minimize the attack vector, right, if you will, or some kind of social engineering attack that an adversary can perpetrate in our environment. So the other thing I want to show is instead of opening up one file at a time, I can tap and hold the big green button. And now I can, and again, this is what we refer to as a session window. But it's customizable. My max right here is 25 files over 8 hours. And when I tap that, what I've done is, now that I've launched that session window, I no longer need to tap my phone, because the next 25 files will open automatically without my having to affirmatively go and tap my phone. And that's just a performance hack, to the extent the company doesn't want their users to have to tap approve for every single file that they open up. It's funny that that's sort of the biggest objection we get. Is like, oh, my users are gonna, they're gonna hate me because they're not gonna want to tap their phone for every single file. What we've discovered realistically is people don't mind it at all, because of that sense of empowerment that you get without a comma, knowing that everything is locked up until you, the user, actually want to go in and unlock the file. So, but it's there, we get it. Not everyone, will want to be as restrictive as, requiring the user to have to tap approve for every single file. Lastly, I'll show you, because we do encrypt granularly at the file level. We have a fairly detailed audit log history. I'm just going to get to my profile here. We have a fairly detailed audit log history. What I'm showing you on my phone is just a regular representation of the request history, but for a live deployment, what you would see is all this information real time for every single user, all the interaction with the file. It will be fed real time to a central system log aggregator. And basically, if you're running a SIEM or a SOC, all that information can be collected real time, and the organization can set whatever notifications they want around the information. So I see there's a question: how is the risk prevented when there are 25 files open simultaneously? There is a high risk. Absolutely. Ganesh asked that question. The question is, how is the risk prevented when there are 25 files open simultaneously? There is a high risk. Couldn't agree more. And let's assume it was 100, right? The session was 100. So if you ask our engineers here at Atacama, they hate the sessions for the very reason, Ganesh, you just asked about, right? Because you are introducing a level of risk. That being said, a couple of things to note there, and this is where this the request history is actually important. So if you set a notification around, the opening of, let's say, 10 files in really quick succession, right? You'd want to flag to know what's going on here. You may want to investigate, or you may want to limit the number of files that someone opens up. That being said, it is exponentially better than the status quo, right? The status quo now is binary, it's all or nothing, right? So you go from 100% secure to 0% secure. If someone's in the environment, now they can open anything they want. With Atacama, you go from 100% secure to maybe 98% secure, right? Because the adversary would have to be on my machine during my session window, right? And they would have to open the maximum number of files before I noticed, my ticker here, right? If I go back here, if it's still open, yeah, my ticker would have to go down to 0 without my having noticed it, right? So, couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's riskier than, opening one file at a time, but it's exponentially more secure than the status quo, which is all or nothing. So, that's pretty much the demonstration. The other thing, if you want to send a file outside the organization, what we do, which is really cool, we generate a link to the encrypted file where you only need to send the link to the recipient. And once the recipient receives the link, they receive it in their browser. It pops open a browser. And then the recipient is able to download the file in their browser. There's a lot of cryptology that happens behind the scenes there that allows that to happen. But the really cool part of that is you as the sender, we have mechanisms baked in where you can actually verify that you sent it to the right recipient and didn't, fat finger the person. And you actually release the decryption on your phone. So you would tap to allow the recipient to decrypt within their web browser. So we really do address meaningfully both encryption of data at rest and in transit.
Dimitri, there is one other question a little bit earlier on in the chat section, asking about the multiple devices and how about the shards. If you can take a look at that, please.
Oh, sure. Let's take a look here in the chat. Here we go. Can you expand on the statement that the bad actor hacking our system would also need access to 3 of our separate devices? I assume these devices are integral to the MFA for access to distributed keys. So yeah, let me walk through that just to flesh it out a little bit. So here's what the deployment looks like. Let's use a really simple example. You want to encrypt everything within human resources. You would literally take the Atacama MSI, you would push it to every human resources employee, okay? And the MSI is going to run on their endpoint, right, on their computer, right? So they're downloading software on the computer. Those individuals would also have to download the Atacama mobile app, right, to their respective devices from the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. And what's cool about Atacama is even though we are not connected to Active Directory, you can still utilize Active Directory for purposes of knowing who you want to push the software to, right? So using that human resources example, you can use that human resources organizational unit, right, from Active Directory and say, I am pushing Atacama to these people. So you can benefit from certain of the efficiencies of Active Directory, but you don't have to rely on the centralization of Active Directory from an identity and access management control. So now that you've pushed the software to the endpoint, the users have downloaded the Atacama mobile app on their phones. The only thing the user needs to do to get started is they have to launch Atacama on their computer, right? Which will pop open a QR code. The user then needs to use the Atacama mobile app to scan that QR code. Once they've done that, they've inextricably linked the 2 devices, right? The users, so Dimitri's phone is now connected to Dimitri's computer, right? That's a very important step because now the software knows when Dimitri's opening a file to send that push notification to Dimitri, all right? Now, as I mentioned earlier, whatever files are now being encrypted with Atacama, right, within HR, right, I receive a key shard for that file. My coworker receives a key shard for that file. Then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone receives a key shard for that file, okay? That key shard that was sent to me is in turn encrypted with my public key. And that's very important because that makes that key shard unique to me. So there's no interoperability of key shards. An adversary can't grab my phone and my colleague's computer and try to decrypt the file. It has to be my phone and my computer, right? Once that happens, right, we've done the linking, the files are encrypted, the keys are distributed, right? You need those minimum 2 devices belonging to the same user in order to decrypt the file. Now, if we have, let's say, 100 people in human resources, right? We literally have 100 key shards for each, basically, you know, for each unique person has their own unique key shard, right? The probability of everyone losing their devices at the same time, very low, but not impossible, right? So when you set up Atacama, it's very important to have proper business continuity and disaster recovery in place because there is no password reset. You can't come to us and say, hey, we lost all our devices. We need you to reset our accounts. No such thing, right? Once Atacama is deployed, we are out of the equation. We are not there. We have zero visibility as to what you're encrypting, how many files you've encrypted, the type of files you encrypted, the velocity with which you're interacting with those files. We do not have any visibility, and our customers like it that way, right? And so let's assume I lost my phone, right? Or I upgraded to the new iPhone 12. What would happen is, from a mathematical standpoint, you would add me back into that human resources group through what we refer to as a distribution event, a redistribution event. And that basically means either an admin or a business line person would, in essence, you know, simply scan my QR code on my phone as a new user, and key shards would be distributed to me. And what I just described is really important because with Atacama, there is no automated profile creation, right? Because what you don't want happening is someone gaining access to an admin's credentials and being able to create a profile for themselves, not a common profile for themselves, and be able to decrypt all these files, right? With Atacama, there always has to be a human intervention where someone who knows the person that's being added to the group can verify that that is, in fact, that person. And we usually require some kind of interaction, whether it's in person or, you know, if it's over the phone or some other communication mechanism, you absolutely have to know who that person is. A couple more questions. We're using data, blah, blah, blah. Okay, on occasion, we clean up directories which require mass migration, blah, blah, blah. Entire folders and directory. Yep, it's that when 25 file Mac is used. As tapping our phone all the time feels beneficial. No, if you're doing a mass migration event, there are a couple of things there, right? This question actually comes up a bit with if you're doing, for example, you know, for recovery purposes, right? You have backups, right? Whether they're electronic or some other form. The cool thing about Atacama is with the files themselves, the key shard for the file remains with the file always. So if you're doing nightly backups and for whatever reason you need to reconstitute that backup, you'd basically take those files, put them back into a location or the same location, and your users would be able to access those files because, again, the key shard is able to be used and recombined to decrypt that file. Right, so that's the benefit of having the key shard travel with the file itself. So you'd be able to, you know, make that migration, etc. In the event a personal device fails, your phone failed, blah, blah, presumably there was a reset request. Yeah, I mean, that's basically what I was describing before, right? So we built the system anticipating that users are going to lose their devices, replace their devices. So from a mathematical standpoint, and I don't want to make this, you know, I don't want to take people back to, you know, pre-calc high school math, but in essence, just simply, if you think of a Cartesian plane, which is the XY axis, if you remember, you only need 2 points on that line to know where that line intersects the XY plane. Well, that XY plane is in fact the password, right? The encryption key, if you will. You only need 2 points, but you can have an infinite number of points on that line to know exactly where it intercepts. And that conceptually is what's happening with our key shards, right? You can have many, many, many of those, and you can continue, you know, ad infinitum on that line, and you can continuously know exactly where that line intersects the XY axis. And that's really simplistically what's happening behind the scenes with our cryptology, even though we're using something a hell of a lot more complicated with parabolas and 3 points on the parabolas, but I'm not going to go there today unless anyone wants to, follow up on that. Happy to do so though, but I hope that answers the question. Great.
Okay, you all set, Dimitri?
Yeah, I can stop sharing.
Yep. And I will start sharing again. I really appreciate your presenting this. I'm sure there are people that are going to have more questions about the product. Let me share my screen here again to wrap up. We do have plenty of time left for additional questions and answers. I did want to just thank you all for attending. And ask you to just, make a comment, whether on LinkedIn or something, if you found that this information was interesting or useful, post something positive for us. Finally, for follow-up information, I want to point out, there's a couple of links here. I should be able, maybe I'll post these in the chat to make it easier as well. But we have a 2-minute video that we put together at vbm.rosects.com. We'd like you to take a look at. The links to find us on LinkedIn. And lastly, if you wish to book a call with me to discuss this or anything else, there's a Calendly link that you can access right here. Let's see if we have any other questions and answers or chats. Looks like we are good. I'll hang out for another minute or two. Again, I want to thank you, Dimitri. I look forward to getting this deployed for more of our customer base. We're very happy with the offering.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now.